Anima is at the heart of everything in the Shadowlands, both from a lore and gameplay perspective. It's the grease that keeps the cycle of life and death turning, and you paying your subscription. But what exactly is Anima? Well, there's a lot of people who know a lot more about WoW lore than I do, and I'm a no beta Andy, so I don't have any particularly insightful answers. What I am is a turbo dork who spends way too much time reading really old books that I don't have anybody to talk about with. So instead, what I'm going to talk about is where the ideas reflected in Anima come from in the real world. I think Anima reflects a really interesting combination of quite a few real-world religious concepts, both contemporary and historical, some of which run quite deep in the way that the WoW universe is constructed. The hope here is that talking about some of the background for this lore will both make the lore more entertaining and allow for a better understanding of the real world as well. First off, as with the last one of these I did about the history of undeath, I'm not saying that Blizzard is directly inspired by everything that I'm going to talk about. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I do think that ideas often have a butterfly effect that causes them to influence works in media well after the idea itself isn't often talked about. The simple truth is that there is nothing new under the sun, and since my sweet mate is an idiot and got me quarantined for coronavirus, I have a lot of time on my hand to, peruse random thoughts about WoW. For ease of understanding, I'm going to break this video down into two sections. The first is a history of Anima as a term, beginning with Aristotle and exploring how its use evolved over time. The second is a review of Mesoamerican religion, particularly some concepts related to Aztec belief, which I am now convinced are incredibly influential to the way in which the Shadowlands and the forces within it function. If you think these theories are cool, or you have a comparison of your own to make, then please let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear about it and maybe have some other things to think about while I'm stuck here in quarantine. Anima, broadly speaking, is the Greek word for soul. For our purposes, the term anima began to take on a life of its own, largely as a result of Aristotle's seminal work, De Anima. In De Anima, a soul is defined as, quote, the actuality of a body that has life. Aristotle explains that there are three substances which make up anything: matter or potentiality, form or actuality, and the combination of the two, which is anima. Without getting too lost in the jungle of language, it is immensely helpful to understand a few key points. First, potentiality and actuality refer to three things: the capability to have a capability, the capability to act, and the action itself. One example from the University of Washington relates to the ability of a human being to speak French. Here we see that the first potentiality would be the ability of a human being to learn French. The second potentiality would be someone who can speak French. Then the realized potentiality, or actuality, is someone who is speaking French. Second, there exists a hierarchy amongst potentialities and actualities that is as follows. First, growth, nutrition, and reproduction. Second, locomotion and perception. Third, intellect or thought. This can be expressed more understandably as the capabilities of plants, animals, and human beings. The final thing to bear in mind is that non-living things are unable to actualize at all, and thus the soul is the active part of a living creature. The more philosophically literate amongst you will have noticed the use of the term form in describing actuality. Form in Greek philosophy usually has metaphysical implications, and for Platonists, which Aristotle kind of was, it's usually associated with the ideal world of thought, which is believed to be unchanging and eternal, as well as the place where the gods resided. There are some really cool takeaways that we can make from this that help us understand the world of the Shadowlands a little better. Particularly interesting is the somewhat confusing distinction between anima and souls within the Shadowlands. In Aristotle's terms, you are not your anima, but are instead made up of anima. You are what Aristotle refers to as the psyche, or the rational mind. As this applies to the Shadowlands, anima is a consequence of the decisions that you made over the course of your life, and the importance of your decisions dictates how much of it you have. In the Shadowlands, You are instead playing as your psyche, or spirit. As a brief aside, I think one of the things that will be very confusing to players about the story of the Shadowlands is their realization that the lore of World of Warcraft is very different from what they thought it was. Just going off the reactions of myself and a lot of streamers to lore speculation over the last several years, I think the vast majority of people playing WoW don't realize that the world is operating on a different metaphysical framework than they might be used to. I'm going to talk about that more when we go to Mesoamerican religion. But with regards to what Anima is, it is useful to remember that as modern people, we are usually operating within a Cartesian rather than an Aristotelian framework. In a Cartesian framework, your mind is like an island separated from your body. The mind and soul are understood as the same thing and live independently of the body, except for the temporary intrusions of things like pain, nervous sensation, and other so-called passions. In an Aristotelian framework, your soul is what you are, not who you are, and it is very closely tied with the body and your actions. Whenever the Aztecs and the Mayans are brought up, it is natural that blood sacrifice and ritual cannibalism are the first things that pop into people's heads. But while acknowledging that there is some graphically reminiscent shit going on in the World of Warcraft, it's not exactly what I want to talk about today. Instead, I'd like to talk about a key concept that underpinned Mesoamerican religion and justified the entire structure of their societies: cosmic mutuality and the cyclical nature of the universe. When attempting to understand how Mesoamerican religion differs from the way that Western religion and philosophy conceive of the world, mutuality is a really important idea. Mutuality is essentially the spiritual equivalent of the conservation of energy. While both the Abrahamic and Dharmic systems allow for interaction between Earth and the divine, this interaction is often constrained. The Dharmic system is kind of unchangeable, and although human beings can certainly interact with it via how they are reincarnated or try to escape from it, we're not really the core of the Dharmic system and are simply a part of it. Meanwhile, the Abrahamic religions inherit a lot of Greek concepts about immutability that require God to be constant in order to be good. To the Aztecs or the Mayans, however, the earthly and spiritual worlds are incredibly close and power each other. Just as the gods might use their power to provide rain or a good harvest, so too did human beings need to power the gods. What was the source of energy, you might ask? Well, put simply, it was blood. For the same reasons strong warriors might be ritually consumed if captured in battle, so that whatever was in them continued on to the eater. It is really easy to see how this mutuality is everywhere in Shadowlands, with the flow of anima from Azeroth required to keep the Shadowlands working. For example, with the Night Fae, we see how the cycle of rebirth and rejuvenation for these nature spirits requires a give and take with the Shadowlands itself. It's not hard to see the similarity between the Winter Queen sacrificing souls to power the groves of Ardenweald with their anima, and the Aztec priests sacrificing people to allow the gods to bless their society with another harvest, which will continue that cycle of blood sacrifice, people being born, harvest, etc. Rest in peace, Ursoc. All my homies loved Ursoc. While the Night Fae show the more spiritual aspects of this practice, which, while still barbaric, did fit into a broader framework about the world with positive intentions, the Venthyr demonstrate a much more physical aspect of this idea, whose leader has made it his goal to suck Garrosh off on the regular in order to increase his own power. This bears even more similarity to Aztec or Mayan blood rituals when you realize that the Venthyr themselves are vampires. However, despite these similarities, there is one glaring problem. I'm not aware of whether energy flows out of the Shadowlands or whether Azeroth is just a never-ending well of souls and anima. If there isn't a return cycle, then there's really no cycle. And honestly, at that point, the Shadowlands comes to more closely resemble the perception of the universe in a Platonic sense, where things coming from the earth have to go through a series of intermediary stages or actors in order to reach the world of the divine. But nevertheless, things continually flow upwards with the absence of very, very specific circumstances. And so if that doesn't, it's not the case, then this is all bullshit and I'm just lying to you. I'm gonna be frank, I'm probably never really gonna figure out because I don't read quest text. So, you know, hope I'm right. Thanks a ton for giving this video a watch. I really had fun doing that. Please let me know if you thought I was like too brief or, you know, not brief enough in terms of description. I was really unsure of what would be the right line to toe in terms of actually keeping it moving along. I plan on doing more of these out of boredom, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch them. If you like this type of video, then you might want to check out the video I posted on Death, which should be in the top right of the screen. It's very similar and honestly goes into a lot more depth, a lot more specificity. Have a wonderful day, y'all. God bless.